Alexander could frustrate him and lure him into a void. Vast but empty lands without food or forage, empty cities with nothing to plunder, empty negotiations, empty time in which nothing happened, and finally, the dead of winter. Russia's harsh climate would make a shambles of Napoleon's organizational genius, and as it played out, Alexander's strategy worked to perfection. Napoleon's inability to engage his enemy got under his skin. A few more miles east, one solid battle, and he could teach this cowardly foe a lesson. His emotions, irration, anger, confusion, overwhelmed his ability to strategize. How could he have come to believe, for instance, that the fall of Moscow would force the Tsar to surrender? Alexander's army was still intact, the French had grown frighteningly weak, and winter was coming. Napoleon's mind had succumbed to the powerful pull of the void that he had entered, and that led him far astray. Alexander's strategy wreaked havoc on the French soldiers as well, who were renowned for their superior discipline and fighting spirit. A soldier can endure almost anything except the expectation of a battle that never comes and a tension that is never relieved. Instead of battle, the French got endless raids and pinprick attacks that came out of nowhere, a continuous threat that gradually built into panic. While thousands of soldiers fell to disease, many, more simply, lost the will to fight. It is human nature to not be able to endure any kind of void. We hate silence, long stretches of inactivity, loneliness. Perhaps this is related to our fear of that final void, our own death. We have to fill and occupy empty space. By giving people nothing to hit, being as vaporous as possible, you play upon this human weakness. Infuriated at the absence not just of a fight, but of any kind of interaction at all, people will tend to chase madly after you, losing all power of strategic thought. It is the elusive side, no matter how weak or small its force, that controls the dynamic. The bigger the enemy, the better this strategy works. Struggling to reach you, the oversized opponent presents juicy targets for you to hit. To create the maximum psychological disturbance, you must make your attacks small but relentless, keeping your enemy's anger and frustration at a constant boil. Make your void complete. Empty negotiations, talks leading nowhere, time passing without either victory or defeat. In a world of accelerated pace and activity, this strategy will have a powerfully debilitating effect on people's nerves. The less they can hit, the harder they will fall. From The 7 Pillars of Wisdom by T.E. Lawrence. Most wars are wars of contact, both forces striving to keep in touch. The Arab War should be a war of detachment, to contain the enemy by the silent threat of a vast unknown desert, not disclosing themselves till the moment of attack. From this theory came to be developed ultimately an unconscious habit of never engaging the enemy at all. This chimed with the numerical plea of never giving the enemy's soldier a target. Keys to warfare. Over the centuries, organized war, in all its infinite variations, from primitive to modern, Asian to Western, has always tended to follow a certain logic, which is so universal as almost to seem inherent to the process. The logic is as follows. A leader decides to take his country to war and raises an army for that purpose. That army's goal is to meet and defeat the enemy in a decisive battle that will force a surrender and favorable peace terms. The strategist guiding the campaign must deal with a specific area, the theater of war. This area is most often relatively limited. Maneuvering in vast open spaces complicates the possibility of bringing the war to closure. Working within the theater of war, then, the strategist contrives to bring his army to the decisive battle in a way that will surprise the enemy or put it at a disadvantage. It is cornered, or attacked from both front and rear, or must fight uphill. To keep his forces strong enough to deliver a mortal blow, he concentrates them rather than dispersing them. Once battle begins, the army will naturally form a flank and rear that it must protect against encirclement, as well as lines of communication and supply. It may take several battles to end the war, as each side works to dominate the key positions that will give it control of the theater, but military leaders must try to end it as quickly as possible. The longer it drags on, the more the army's resources are stretched to a breaking point where the ability to fight collapses. Soldiers' morale declines with time as well. As with any human activity, however, this positive, orderly side generates a negative shadow side that contains its own form of power and reverse logic. The shadow side is guerrilla warfare. The rudiments of guerrilla warfare originated thousands of years ago, when smaller nations found themselves invaded by more powerful neighbors. To survive, their armies were forced to flee the invader, for any direct engagement would have destroyed them. It soon became clear that the longer they fled and eluded battle, the more they ruined the enemy's strategies and confused it by not conforming to the usual logic of engagement. Their next step was to take this further. These early guerrilla warriors learned the value of operating in small, dispersed bands, as opposed to a concentrated army, keeping in constant motion, never forming a front, flank, or rear for the other side to hit. The enemy would want to keep the war confined to a particular space, better than to extend it over as much territory as possible, melting into the countryside, forcing the enemy to disperse itself in the chase, opening itself up to raids and pinprick attacks. The enemy would naturally want a quick end to the war, so it was desirable to drag it out as long as possible, making time an offensive weapon that consumed the enemy with friction and sagging morale. In this way, over thousands of years and through trial and error, the art of guerrilla warfare developed and was refined into its present-day form. Conventional military training and thought revolve around concentrating for battle, maneuvering within limited areas, and straining for the quick kill. Guerrilla warfare's reversal of this natural order of war makes it impossible for a conventional army to counter, hence its power. In the shadowland of reverse warfare, where none of the normal rules apply, the conventional army flounders. Done right, guerrilla warfare is virtually unbeatable. The word guerrilla, small war in Spanish, was coined in reference to the Peninsular War of 1808 to 1814, which began when Napoleon invaded Spain. Melting into their country's mountains and inhospitable terrain, the Spaniards tortured the French, making it impossible for them to profit from their superior numbers and weaponry. Napoleon was bedeviled by an enemy that attacked without forming a front or rear. The Cossack fighters, who undid him in Russia in 1812, had learned a lot from the Spanish and perfected the use of guerrilla warfare. Their harassment caused far more damage than anything the rather incompetent Russian army could inflict. This strategy has become a more powerful and prevalent tool in modern warfare for several reasons. First, by exploiting technological advances in weaponry and explosives, a small guerrilla band can cause disproportionate damage. Second, Napoleonic warfare greatly expanded the size of conventional armies, making them much more vulnerable to hit-and-run tactics from light and mobile forces. Finally, guerrilla war has been adopted for political purposes to great effect. By infusing local people with the fervor of a cause, a revolutionary leader can covertly multiply his strength. His